This is R.J. Rushdoony, Easy Chair number 422, November 14, 1998. This evening we have the privilege of having with us Quentin Johnston, originally of Scotland, now the main pastor at the Church of Christian Liberty in Arlington Heights, Illinois. He is there associated with the very important multiple ministries of Dr. Paul Lindstrom, one of the great and key figures in Christian education today, not only in homeschooling, where he is clearly the leader, but also in the operation of a Christian school which has now reached 850 pupils. Quentin, in this session, I'd like to have you give your reactions to American Christianity. You've been here for a number of years, since you left Scotland about 6.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen Christianity in the South, very definitely, and in the Midwest, notably in the Chicago area, but you've also had occasion to encounter its work in the West and the Pacific Northwest. Now, we have been for years under bitter attack from abroad as having a kind of cheap and superficial Christianity, as being a failure because we do not have an established church, and so on and on. And I know you're more than familiar with these criticisms. Would you like to comment on them generally and specifically?
Yes, Rush. Generally, I would repeat something I said in the last tape, that I think we have a consumer mentality which has grown up in the Christian community. As we are consumers in other areas of life, as we can choose our long-distance phone company, as we can choose what suits we want to wear, what clothes, what shoes, and so forth, we choose what sports clubs we want to join, we also now choose our churches. And we look for churches that fit our personality, our life goals, our ambitions, that pander to our particular demographic, and so forth. As a consequence of that, we have a church nationally that has, to use a term that you used in one of your last articles, has become irrelevant, has traded real culture-changing relevance for utter triviality and irrelevance. The weaknesses that I perceive of so much American Christianity is centered upon a pietistic Jesus and me mentality, which is far too concerned with my, as it were, personal response to Jesus. As I heard on the radio even today, making Jesus my, quote, forever friend. And this radio show was concerned, I believe it was originating from Michigan, was concerned that people would make Jesus their forever friend. Well, where you have a Christian culture that is talking about Jesus, the eternal Son of God, as our forever friend, really no different from Barney the dinosaur, then we have no cultural relevance to say, what are we saying to people who are in the inner cities, who are struggling with divorce, with abusive spouses, with drug and alcohol abuse, with unemployment? Are we asking them to make Jesus their forever friend? We've lost all sense, I think, of cultural relevance. Theologically, as one pastor I know speaks of, we live in a theological dark age. We have sought to reinvent theology in our own likeness and image. Of course, we are the children of our age to a great extent, or so many are. We are existentialists. Many of the churches are pastored by the 60s generation, who, even having come through seminary and so forth, in truth have reinvented the faith. And so you have classically, of course, Bill Hybels in Willow Creek, who, in wanting to begin his church, goes round and takes a poll of the northern suburbs of Chicago. What would you like in a church? Do you like blue carpets, green carpets? What's a more nice color? Are hymns a bit too long, or are they too short? Do you like sermons? Do you like talks? What do you like? And then, based upon his poll, he puts together a church. Well, of course, he's got thousands of people attending his church, but where's the cultural relevance to this? We're not really saying anything to our culture, or saying nothing to our nation. As a consequence, we're electing people to Congress that are apostates, that should be, or who should be, excommunicated from whatever church they belong to. But of course, famously, the Baptist church that our current president belongs to wouldn't dream of excommunicating him, although they should. And of course, Moeller, the head of one of the Baptist seminaries, has actually called for his excommunication. So theologically, we have exchanged in this nation a rich heritage, a rich Reformed heritage, a Puritan heritage, a heritage that even the Baptist churches were Reformed, for the Arminian gospel, for the gospel of pietistic quietness, for a gospel which really has nothing to say to the city square or the town square, to City Hall, very little to say into business, very little about changing the way we do business. Rather, the most important thing is to be a regular tender at the church and to tithe regularly and make sure you don't miss a meeting. Utter irrelevance.
There has been, of late, a considerable revulsion against what you have spoken about. And one radio commentator commented that in the last election, the Christians exercised far more influence than they had for some time, and in a number of states and cities elected officials. Do you see this as a small or major trend, and how do you regard it?
I hope that the Christians in this nation are first of all repenting of the numbers of them who have voted for people who do not represent them.
Mm-hmm.
For years, Christians have assumed that it is better to vote for the lesser of two evils,
yes,
than it is to make a stand for righteousness. Voting for the lesser of two evils is a ridiculous concept. If most of those people who voted for, let us say, one of these lesser of two evils, whoever that might be, was given a choice by their friends to either go to a pub to drink beer or to a strip joint, most of them wouldn't choose going to the drink beer because it was the lesser of two evils. They wouldn't assume, well, because getting drunk is less of an evil than going with a prostitute, then we better just go and get drunk. And yet they take that view into their politics, and in effect they hire men who are whoremongers and drunkards. So this idea of the lesser of two evils is a nonsense. The Christian church must begin to deal with the grassroots issues. I don't have a lot of faith in electing a Christian president at this point. I would much rather Christians take a self-conscious decision to build at the local level, to put Christians on school boards, to put Christians into the elected offices in their districts, to take over at local level, at local city hall, in their town hall, in their village hall, and begin to build that way, to have a voice. Because we will not have a Christian Congress or a Christian State House or a Christian president until we win the arguments in the hearts and lives of every man, woman and child, or certainly voting man and woman in the nation. As you yourself have said before, the issue has got to be regeneration and not revolution. And so many Christians have a revolutionary idea that if only we can get a Christian president, everything will all the problems will be solved. I'm hoping that this argument, as I've outlined it, is being heard and will win the day.
You've lived in two areas where there are a great many very large churches, and with a dramatic appeal to people. You have referred to them obliquely, but as against that, do you feel that the kind of emphasis on a broader Christianity, on beginning with the conversion of man and saving all of society, of making everything God-centered, do you see any movement in that direction?
Yes, I do. Although we have spoken about some of the problems, I think what is exciting as I am perceiving it is there is a movement towards the Reformed distinctives of the Christian faith. I am meeting with a number of Reformed Baptists, for instance, in the Chicagoland area. An increasing number, it would appear to me.
Mm-hmm.
Men who have come through what I perceive to have been the Baptistic mill, gone to Dallas, perhaps come through Moody or whatever. They come out at the other end. They end up going to one of the Baptist seminaries in a Baptist church, and they find, if they're seeking, that what they've been taught doesn't work. That spiritually it does not provide the answers that it said it was going to provide. And as a consequence, I think there is a movement towards the Reformed distinctives of the faith. And I am aware of that almost wherever I go. I'm aware of wonderful things happening in Ohio. I'm aware of things happening in Florida, in Illinois, and in other places. I'm sure it's going on. Wherever really I speak to anybody, Tennessee is another place. I've spoken to somebody again. Men are coming together, seemingly rediscovering for the first time, many Baptists, the Reformed heritage that is theirs, and are seeking to live in terms of it. But, of course, coming under tremendous pressure from the churches that they're pastoring. Some are having to leave. Others are very wisely building very carefully precept upon precept within their churches, and hopefully in time will bring them around.
Your work at Arlington Heights has as its base, what is it, 15 acres?
Yes, it's about that. I forget the exact.
And at least two buildings, one of them the former major high school in the city. It's 2 stories, isn't
Yes.
it? And about how many square feet?
About 270,000 square feet.
275,000 square feet. And every bit of that is now occupied daily in Christian activities, is it not?
Yes, it is. At the school, we have a day school, K through 12, approaching about 850 students this year. The children are drawn from many different churches and environments, some coming up from the inner city, by train, by car, some coming in from affluent outlying areas. Arlington Heights itself is in the northwest suburbs, a very affluent area. But our school, as you say, used to be the former Arlington Heights High School. They sold it to us reluctantly, but they sold it to us. Housed on our campus now, we also have Christian Liberty Press, which is increasingly providing books and materials for the independent homeschool market. And principally, we have employed about 150 people with our homeschool program called CLASS, Christian Liberty Academy Satellite Schools. For the CLASS program, we provide a curriculum based exclusively around each child's test scores. We grade the work, the tests that they do, and if they stay until they graduate, then they actually graduate from Christian Liberty Academy Arlington Heights and get a high school diploma from Christian Liberty Academy in Arlington Heights.
When you last returned to Scotland, did you find anyone there interested or curious or amazed at the work that Paul Lindstrom is doing there at Christian Liberty? In other words, is that kind of activity occurring at all in Europe?
I am not aware of anything like Christian Liberty in the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Sad to say, the only amazement that I found when I spoke of the work was that there was such a work at all.
Was what?
That there was even such a work at all.
Oh. Huh.
There wasn't amazement that wasn't God doing marvelous things. It was just an amazement, well, why bother? What's wrong with the schools? What's the big beef? There really wasn't an amazement at the work of God.
Do you find many people visiting you there who are interested in doing something similar to what Paul Lindstrom has done?
Visiting in Scotland? Or visiting in Arlington Heights?
Any people in the United States who want to imitate?
Yes, there are a few. Every year we get a few inquiries from people who are interested in starting something similar. Just a few months ago, we had some men flew up, I believe from the southwest somewhere, from Texas area, by jet. One of them was a wealthy businessman, was interested in starting something like a Christian Liberty Academy and wanted to look at the model. You see, we have established that model very specifically because we genuinely believe that we have to, if we're going to see the demise of the public school system, we have to model an alternative. And although we are, of course, are strongly in favor of homeschooling as possibly even the preferred and first option, the reality is not everybody will be able to homeschool. There are a number of situations that will just preclude that, perhaps single-parent families or a number of other things. And therefore, Christian schools are going to be important. And so we are seeking to model that so that others can come along behind us and say, okay, we can run with this as well. We can establish a school on a low budget, but nevertheless provide a good education.
Is there any thought given there to putting out a handbook or a booklet or book so that others can study it and follow in your footsteps?
I believe in the past, a number of years ago, Dr. Lindstrom did produce such a package.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot say whether we still have such a thing that as an active concern. I would imagine that we would handle those probably more on a one-on-one basis, that if somebody asked a question, asked for information, that we would provide everything we could for them. Although it is a thought, one of the great challenges I believe that faces us in the next millennium, as well as the end of this one really, is to put feet onto our philosophy, to actually demonstrate how our philosophy can impact the things we actually do. And so perhaps this is something we need to consider.
I know you're all overworked there, but I do hope you'll give some thought to reprinting or expanding that handbook and making it available. Certainly a number of publications, such as the Chalcedon Report, would be very happy to publicize it. And it is important to restore the Catholicity of the Church, because that was a key aspect of the Catholicity of the Church at one time. It was not only the preaching center, it was the educational center, it was the healing center, hospitals. It moved into every area of life and thought with a ministry. And today those various ministries, such as the school and the hospital and others, have separated themselves from the church, have become secularized, and in some instances are a problem to us. So I think what you're doing there bears reproducing, and I'd like to encourage you and Paul Lindstrom to put out such a manual.
Okay. I think it's vital that we do spread the word, that we do get others involved. Clearly, the role of the church as we look to the inevitable collapse of our society, whether that is in terms of the year 2000 bug or some other issue, is largely not to the point. The issue is that our society is under God's judgment. The reality is that the fabric of our nation is falling apart. And unless the church will reach out, unless the church has a social policy, has a understanding of what it takes to build a Christian nation, then we will be unprepared, and it perhaps will be another generation before we can see some of these things come about. So we take that admonition seriously, and we'll give it some very serious consideration.
Well, I think if you decide, or Paul Lindstrom decides to write such a pamphlet or book, I for one would be happy, and I'm sure the others of our staff would be also, to read it and to make suggestions of areas where perhaps further development might be necessary. You see, more than once, vast portions of the world have been Christianized and have been lost, as they are today being lost, because the church has become, as it were, just the chaplain to the existing order, and not the builder, the shaker, the great source of energy to that order. And I'm afraid it is so with us in this century. It's now coming to an end, and the church is nowhere near as central as it was in 1900. Not that what we had in 1900 was good, but we have not improved on it.
Well, one of the challenges I think that we are aware of in our own ministry, as well as we look abroad at the whole of the American church, is to take that which we have and reproduce it. We have to begin with education, because we have to train the next generation to do the things that we are currently ourselves doing or aspiring to do. It takes a lifetime of dedicated service, either to business or to academia or to politics or whatever it is, to actually become good at it and change the way it's done. There's no point in men in their 40s or 50s or 60s deciding to run for office. They don't have the experience, they've not laid the groundwork necessary. There's no point in men of that age starting businesses. I mean, it's not a bad thing, but in terms of shaping the way business is done, it takes people schooled and groomed in it from their young age. One of the great issues we as Christians must deal with is, what are we doing for our children in terms of their vocations? Because we have to train them or have to shape them as they grow up to become world changers or nation changers. The church is the only hope that this nation or any nation has, not as an institution, but in terms of the message of the gospel of Christ it brings. Our children must grow up with that gospel, imbued with a sense of the importance of the gospel as it touches every aspect of life and thought. My challenge, I believe, as I believe the challenge is for all of us, is to, as Scripture says, to take our children as arrows and to fire them straight and true at the bullseye, at the target, so that they will run true. We have trained them well. They've been educated at home or in Christian school in terms of a reformed understanding of the faith, in terms of a reformed understanding of history and philosophy and economics and so forth, so that when they give their whole lives to whatever enterprise they move into, then they can build generationally. Until we do that, I'm afraid we will simply keep on repeating the cycles we have of revivals and revivalism, of happy clappy services and feel-good 3-point sermons that really will not touch our nation and will not train our children how to offer hope in the gospel of Jesus Christ to our nation.
One of the things that I think we should discuss is the fact that the church scene here in the United States has a factor that distinguishes it from churches elsewhere, namely the revival of the pre-Christian school movement that once prevailed. You have a vast number of children who today are not in state schools but in Christian schools. You have a growing number of children who are in home schools, and the homeschool associations have been growing by leaps and bounds. I have mentioned on various occasions, and I want to restate it because I think it's so exciting a fact. Last year I spoke, as I often have, at Christian homeschool conferences of parents. There were 3 that I spoke to, and they were not the only ones in the state. These were regional. And they ran from a couple of thousand to one which had 10,000 parents present.
Gracious.
Now that indicates a tremendous revolution. And when you realize these are parents who are dissatisfied with the public school, who take the faith more seriously than their church does, and have gone to the expense and time of establishing a Christian homeschool, it's really exciting. It tells you that there's a different kind of Christianity in development. Another interesting aspect of the same situation is that a number of these homeschoolers are now developing home churches, and the result is a home church movement that is spreading and growing, and in some instances becoming large-scale churches with a considerable number of students in their Christian school. So Christian Liberty Academy has been an important part of that revolution with its Christian school and home school and the publicity it is given to both movements. I trust more and more will be done to focus national and international attention on that aspect of your ministry, because it is known abroad and it needs to be publicized even more. I found it was well known when I went to Australia, and I had people ask me about it. So I don't know how fully aware Christian Liberty is of its worldwide impact.
Well, in Australia, interestingly, we are somewhat aware. We had one of our men, Mike McHugh, go down to Australia last year, I think it was. We provide homeschool materials to the somewhat developing homeschool situation down there. Now, if memory serves me right, I think either it has already become illegal or is going to become illegal to homeschool in Australia. They are closing down all non-accredited colleges, and it is becoming very difficult. They are aggressively pursuing a state control over every aspect of life. Of course, classically, the recent well-known recall of weapons and so forth in Australia, which, despite what everybody's saying, my understanding is an utter and total failure. So we are aware that in other nations our material is being used. One of the big challenges I think we have, as all Christian publishers have, is to internationalize our books, is to bring that reformed distinctive of education into materials that can be used easily or well in other cultures. And so we need to have men writing who understand the Far East, for instance, who understand Eastern Europe, who understand other places other than America, to begin to write critiques, commentaries, histories, and so forth, dealing with these cultures, dealing with the issues as they're presented, with the religious problems and the religious issues that are presented in these cultures from a Reformed perspective. And I know some men are. For instance, I'd name a fellow called Ralph Smith in Japan, who we work with, who is writing and over there translating Reformed materials into Japanese, and doing a tremendous job of interacting with that culture and critiquing it in terms of Reformed theology.
Do you have any thoughts to share with us on thinking going on at Christian Liberty about the future of their work and ministry?
Well, the ministry now has been running for 30 years, since Paul Lindstrom first developed a homeschool curriculum for a young lad who wasn't doing well in public school. We believe that the Lord would have us continue to grow, to continue to influence. So we're making plans in those terms. We're making plans in terms of our homeschool program to streamline that, to bring that into more compliance, if you will, with the way things are done nowadays. We have changed a lot of the requirements on homework and so forth, and given a little bit more movement or ease for the parents to develop the curriculum for their children and yet still stay with us. One thing we do know is this, that the homeschool movement will continue to grow. There is an increasing dismay amongst Christians with what their children are learning. And increasingly, despite what so many of the mainstream Christian commentators and prognosticators are saying, who are encouraging people to stay with the public school system, increasing numbers of Christians are saying this is not working. As a consequence, more and more materials are being published. One of the problems I have with the modern homeschool movement as it has developed is that there are real problems with much of the material that is out there. Frankly, I have to say, so much of it is trash.
Yes.
So much of it, and that's not just theologically, just educationally, it's nonsense. Now, I'm not saying that our own work is beyond critique in any sense of my stretch of the imagination, but we have to, as Reformed Christians, begin seriously to ask ourselves questions in terms of what we are producing, and to produce self-consciously reformed materials, self-consciously reconstructionist materials, theonomic materials, if you will, materials that reflect a presuppositional world and life view, so that those Christians who are looking for some substantial Christian curriculum can find it. One of the other problems I think that is developing, and with the increase of the independent homeschool market, has a lot to do with the nature of homeschoolers themselves. These are people who have taken an initiative, often against the advice of even pastors. I was talking to somebody recently who sends their children to our Christian school. His pastor believes that all Christians should have their children in public schools, so they can act as a witness and salt and light in schools. Utter lawlessness, utter abrogation of their responsibilities as parents, but it sounds good. So these are parents who have already decided to, if you will, paddle their own canoe. However, they take that into the selection of curriculum. And so often they are unprepared or unequipped to choose the correct curriculum for the child. So they end up choosing a curriculum that is not integrated, or one that their children does well in, which means that perhaps is not actually challenging the child. And so one of my concerns is, as we work in both camps, producing an integrated curriculum for our class program, and also providing books in our Christian Liberty Press work, is to provide curriculum that holds together, that stays together, that gives a consistent world and life view. And so at Christian Liberty Academy, Christian Liberty Press, class, and so forth, we are taking this issue very seriously and are seeking to address this problem, first of all, amongst what we produce, and then encouraging others. It's a vast market, and there's plenty of room for good materials.
Well, the Christian homeschool movement is remarkable because it's creating a desire on the part of parents to take charge of areas they once surrendered. I can recall when no one dreamed it would ever be possible to get the Christian family to resume some of its historic duties. And the Christian homeschool movement has been a particularly dramatic example of how that change is possible. I think it's going to come in country after country. I know at first, when I had contact with Christian leaders in Britain and Australia, their attitude, and Canada, their attitude was, you'll never get our adults to show an interest in anything like that. Well, now they have in all three areas and are doing so in increasing numbers. So we have to recognize that somehow, whether by adversity or by more mature preaching from the pulpit, we are developing a more responsible Christian membership. And perhaps we need to stress that. Perhaps we could do that in the report sometime, creating responsible Christians, expanding the areas of responsibility, because there has been a progressive surrender. Now there is the beginning of a progressive recapture of one area after another. I'm encouraged also to see that this is taking unusual forms. We have groups in the United States of Christian artists, artists who are self-consciously Christian and are successful full-time artists. Now they're just an insignificant number in the great, vast context of the United States, but they are important in what they represent, an application of the faith to a specific area.
Well, Rush, it comes back to something I think that is vitally important. We have to teach our children that a calling from God, a vocation, if you will, from God, doesn't necessarily mean a career in a pulpit. But a calling from God can be to business, to art, to sciences, and so forth. And if we will have a generation of children growing up with this view that everything they do is consecrated to God, every aspect of their life, whether it is as an artist, whether it is a singer, as a movie actor, as a clerk in a store, as whatever it is, then the government of God, the kingdom of God, can be progressively established in each of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a training that will only take place in a Christian environment, where for the entire school career of a child, they are trained with these world and life views and these presuppositions. Thus, this is a challenge that we're faced.
You're so right. One of the things that gave vitality to the Puritan movement for generations and persisted to our time was that there was once a strong emphasis in preaching on the necessity for a calling. And the word calling did not apply merely to the ministry or to missionary work. It was across the boards. And people do not have a sense of calling now. They go into a work because they think the opportunities are great there, financially and otherwise, so that they have no sense of calling.
Let me interject it with something there, Rush, because on this issue of calling, I think as Christian parents, we've got to think about, if we're going to build generationally, we need to bring our children to understand that life is not, or the Christian life is not, middle-class American suburbia.
Mm-hmm.
That we cannot equate successful Christian living with a Volvo, although you have one, I don't mean to make that, but as the classic yuppie symbol.
19 years old.
Right, as a brand new, classic yuppie symbol at the front door, a Mont Blanc pen, and Gucci shoes. Middle class suburbia, middle class is not what Christianity is all about. We have to teach our children lessons that we have learned, which is our life is given, is expended doing what God calls us to do. And for many of them, it will mean dedicating themselves to education to train yet another generation. We mustn't be careful that we do not teach our children that the most reformed thing they can do is just become wealthy. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's important to have wealthy men and women, benefactors. But even those who are wealthy need to understand that their wealth is theirs on loan. It is there to fund, obviously, their own family, but to fund the kingdom of God, to provide finances for the kingdom. And so in our education, this issue of calling, of understanding that we serve God principally, that we give our lives for the gospel and for the kingdom, whether it is as a CEO of a company, or as a nurse, or as a minister of the gospel, or as somebody who pumps gas. Whatever it is that we do for God's glory, and we dedicate ourselves to teaching the next generation. For many, that will mean getting our kids into Christian education as teachers. And speaking as a Christian educator, one of the major lacks that I see as we look around and interview year after year in our growing school is people who are self-consciously reformed who want to teach. Unfortunately, that is an area that is almost exclusively given over to young Arminian girls who love children. And too many of our young men are not prepared to go into that as a vocation. It's not well paid. They are not going to necessarily enjoy the middle-class lifestyle that perhaps their education might otherwise have entitled them to in previous years. But we have to move away from the societal norms and build a Christian culture, and that is a generational prospect.
I think what you said is very important. The necessity for a calling must prevail. Some years ago, I had a discussion with a man who was an aerospace engineer, and he said at the time that he had seen successions of oversupply and shortage in his field. And he said, the trouble is we have now too many vocational advisors who will look around and say to a young man, there is a shortage of engineers or of architects or of this and that. It's a good field to get into. And you have some aptitude in the sciences. And he said, suddenly that field will be overcrowded. And then they'll shift into other fields. So he said it's been a runaround because people make the mistake of saying, not, what do I have an aptitude for? Where do I feel I have a calling? That's where God wants me to be. And no matter how crowded the field may be today, God will open up the doors for me. We don't have that. Instead, they go where supposedly the opportunities are. And I feel it's a serious mistake. I feel that the child who has an aptitude, or the young man or woman in a particular area, should be encouraged, however overcrowded the field is, to develop their talents in terms of that particular field.
I don't need to change the subject, but this is interesting what we're talking about. I do want quickly, before we end here, could you tell us a little bit about Christian Liberty Press? I think you said you had, was it 20 or 25,000 students in your...
In total, it's difficult to get exact figures because we have some students who are enrolled in a couple of years at one time and so forth, and we're still trying to iron the bugs out of our new computer system and really get accurate information. But we reckon on around 25,000 students who come to us for all or the vast majority of their curriculum requirements.
Could you tell us what's involved in the press? Because that alone is a huge ministry right there.
Well, Christian Liberty Press grew out of the fact that we wanted to publish our own materials. We publish an extensive catalogue which is available by calling Christian Liberty Academy, and people can send off for good quality books. We try and get as many reformed materials as possible, as well as our own, in there, so that they can equip themselves to train their children appropriately.
Go ahead and give the number where people can call, or the address, or both.
Okay, the number is 847-259-4444. 847-259-4444.
Well, thank you all for listening, and we're very grateful to you, Quentin, for being with us and taking time to do this taping. I'm sure those who are listening are going to find it profitable listening and may be in touch with Christian Liberty before too long. Thank you all, and good night.